Salutations, everybody. It is Matty here today, sitting down for my review of Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. A big thank you to 2K for providing the review copy well ahead of launch, about 8 days or so I was able to complete the main story, a lot of side content, let my thoughts digest, marinate, to then deliver them all to you. I want to start off by thanking all of you for tuning in, because I'm happy to say that in the first quarter of 2022, we've nailed, outside of Ghostwire Tokyo and Horizon Forbidden West, every single major release for the beginning of this year in a day one review. That's all thanks to your support. So if you're looking for more day one reviews, consider subscribing. Thank you for clicking. And with that, let's talk about the latest day one release, Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. This is coming to PlayStation, Xbox, and PC. I played this over on the PC on a old rig, mind you, my 980 Ti. And I gotta say, this game was super well optimized there on a starting note. But let's get into what Tiny Tina's Wonderlands is, because it's an interesting one for sure. This game was created to be a refresh on the Borderlands series, going from Pandora to the tabletop. So they're shooting for a fantasy vibe here with constant references to D&D. And the changes are, instead of having preset characters with pre-made classes and 3 skill trees attached to them, you now customize your own character, who's fully voiced. Instead of looting just procedurally generated weapons, you also get armor, amulets, and rings. The changes it needs, right? Well, wrong. A lot of these changes just blend Tiny Tina's Wonderlands into the pack. And now they come with a lot of the issues that have plagued the series since the pre-sequel. Tiny Tina's Wonderlands is more of the same in a lot of ways. A nice 20-hour romp across a ton of wacky locations using all manner of weapons. It served as a nice palate cleanser, and not by any means is it a bad game. It's just one I'm overly familiar with, tired of, and in some instances, I think I may have outgrown it. But otherwise, I feel like the game never captured the universe just right. So all in all, Tiny Tina's Wonderlands is a game that I wanted to love more than how I felt about Stranger of Paradise, where that was a game I was like thinking I really wanted to love. But Borderlands, man, I have best friends I made through Borderlands 2. Like, this series means so much to me. There was a point where I was a Borderlands 3 YouTube channel. It was all I talked about. Like, I love this series. To see it go down this route where it's not bad, it's just not made for people like me, is kind of disappointing. So who's it made for? Well, if the writing and the jokes are anything to go by, kids. It feels like Gearbox is shooting for a different audience here with its T for T rating. The writing for Borderlands is something that I have been extremely critical of since Borderlands 2. Borderlands 1 showed us you can really meld some mature humor into a surprisingly addicting looter shooter and have something special, something we had never really seen for its time. Then Borderlands 2 comes along and says, hey, those silent characters you played as in the last game, they're worth caring about, evoking emotion from the player at the same time as making them laugh. Then Borderlands, the pre-sequel, it just exists. Borderlands 3 was undoubtedly fun as hell to play, but the Calypso twins constantly berating you with fart jokes, fake YouTuber personas, and overall just having an unfunny nature about them displayed that pre-sequel wasn't just a rare miss. And now Tiny Tina's Wonderlands arrives. A game so awe-inspiringly detached from the dark comedic nature of its series that I wonder if Gearbox actually forgot what made Borderlands writing great, what made the series popular in the first place outside of its addicting gameplay loop. Borderlands was always unafraid to tease anybody, and they did it in a tactful way that allowed you to enjoy it without feeling like you were being targeted. In those moments in between, you would have well-developed characters with beautiful casting choices just riffing back and forth and being enjoyable in their own rights. With the latest entry, Wonderlands is so concerned with not offending anyone that they never say anything worthwhile at all. They're constantly doing a careful dance as to not upset anyone, and the end result is a plethora of awful poop jokes with nonsensical quips like this part here where I get called a cutie idiot for a half hour.
Hey, you little cutie idiots! Or you can just stand there like a dumb dummy and listen to me. Not gonna work on me, you cutie dummy. Nice and quiet. Like your grave! Anyway, my general point is that you're a super loser and the Dragon Lord is the best evil guy in the whole world! You cutie.
Its T for T rating here clearly gets in the way, where I wonder if this game was made for me at all. It feels like it's geared towards a younger audience, and the writing team honestly at moments feels really handcuffed. I know not everyone plays Borderlands for the writing. Certainly I'm not going to sit here and pretend I do. But I'm also not going to ignore that this is a big part of Borderlands' success. It's a funny series. It's raunchy at times. It's downright dark in certain moments. Even Borderlands 3 showed that a little bit. I remember in Borderlands 3, there's a place you can go where you can attend a birthday party. And that birthday party is of a young kid who sadly passed away. His dad is there hosting the party, And all that's left are the records this kid had achieved. And you're going through, smashing all the records. And he's like, oh, okay, that's good. And it's this moment of like, this is so messed up, but that's what humor is about. It's funny because it's dark. And we don't have enough dark comedy in games nowadays, I don't think. And Borderlands was one of the few that really pushed the limits without being outright absurd. Now, in a lot of ways, it's just, I view it as immature. And I typically have an immature sense of humor. I can get down with some good fart jokes, some good poop jokes, why not? But when it's all you're pretty much telling, and the rest are just like knee slapper one-liners like, oh, what was that? Haha. It's just not funny anymore. It's not. And so those moments where they try to be emotional don't hit as hard because in Borderlands 2, for example, you're constantly laughing and then also you're like, yeah, wait, who just died? No, that piece of shit. Like, you know what I'm saying? There's an up and down roller coaster that really only Borderlands provided for so long. And now it feels like that's gone as they see other popular looter shooters out there and say, well, let's aim over here for a younger audience. Does that make it bad? No. If you're a dad looking for a game for your kid, this is it. This is really it. It's perfect for that. But for people like me, I think on the writing front, what you loved about Borderlands isn't there anymore. I say all that not to go in on the writers. I know that's probably not what you're here for. You want to hear more about the gameplay. We'll get to that. But rather, I say all this because Tiny Tina's Wonderlands was the perfect opportunity for a refresh. Perhaps my biggest criticism of the game is that it never takes advantage of the new space it's in. The enemy variants are severely lacking as you ground and pound skeletons in the game that all sound like Danhausen. You have melee systems that are undercooked. You get swords, axes, who cares? They're all mapped to the melee button and you may as well have been using the back of your gun to hit people. It doesn't have any combos, anything interesting there. There are no skill checks, for example, no legitimate choices. In a D&D inspired adventure, I don't know how you don't do this. And I know the latter part is something that's not there. I'm not docking points for it because it doesn't exist. I'm critiquing the game on what is there. But again, it just feels like it's symbolizing all of the missed opportunities here. D&D is all about in the moment choices, using your skill sets. And when you have gameplay systems that say like, hey, you can up your dexterity, hey, you can up your strength, you have all these skills that exist, but they're just for the gameplay system, the guns, and even there aren't prerequisites for certain equipment you can have. They're just kind of boosts. It feels overall like an undercooked RPG in many ways. And that's, again, a product of them going wider, which sounded really good on paper. Like, oh, a multiple class setup. That's awesome. But then you don't realize that the finely crafted skill trees per preset characters were actually giving much more depth. So the story itself poses the question, what if we took Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep DLC and made it into a full game? And that honestly sounds awesome because that DLC rocks. Tiny Tina hosts the Bunkers and Badasses session. You are the fate maker, the one that enters this world and can change everything. And it's also a perfect excuse for the writing as she makes up the story as she goes along. Literally, there will be moments where she'll go, oh, I didn't know this, and she'll just change the story on the fly, which fits Tiny Tina as a character, but I think the writers may have used this a bit too much as a crutch. What I was disappointed by with this game is it doesn't have, for those of you out there who are like me and you love this movie, what I was kind of hoping for was a Lego movie moment. A moment of taking the game, taking that shared experience, in the case of the Lego movie, the building of it all, where you'd share that with someone, the father-son relationship, taking that and making it feel real, even though we're interacting with something more digitized. You know, this is a game really about bringing people together around the table. It was developed during a pandemic, so I can imagine that was a particularly interesting subject for them to tackle with the main story, but it never has that moment where the table comes to life, if you will. It never really goes there. And there are moments it tries to get more emotional, but it's on a character-driven front, and it just, again, doesn't work because they don't spend enough time developing them. They just spend that time making stupid quips. At the other end of the table is the Dragon Lord, your main protagonist, who is mostly invisible for a large chunk of the game, and he has a rather predictable backstory that, again, I think if they were to expand upon this more, would have been fun, would have been interesting, could have had that Lego movie moment, but they never quite go for it. So all in all, the story, the writing fell short for me. I know that's not what we all play Borderlands for. Let's get into the gameplay, because I already said I wasn't in love with it all, not because it's bad, but because it's familiar. So let's start off with shoot, loot, repeat. Nothing wrong with that. It works. Still works in this game. Add to that, though, spells, armor, amulets, and rings, and on top of your usual weapons and shields that you'll be looting, and you have more than ever to customize when you're kitting out your character. I want to shout out the spells here. This is one of the parts I think they got really right when it came to embracing the universe and adding something cool into the mix. So usually you just had your action skill. Whatever your class had, you would have a cooldown timer for that. You could pull it every minute, every 30 seconds, what have you, and you could wreak havoc with that skill or change the battle. Now with spells, this is a lootable item that gives you another skill outside of your weapons to use. And some of them are cool, like you'll be shooting out a ton of icicles, you'll be shooting fireballs out of the sky, spells that can slow enemies, some that can poison enemies. There's a large variety of them, and I found these very enjoyable to experiment with because they were, again, a new lootable, but also it really changed the gameplay, the feel, and the builds. The builds here are, as expected with Borderlands, quite sound. When you add on top of that your armor, which would give you different bonuses for skills in your skill tree. You add in the amulets, which can maybe increase your reload speed, different buffs here or there. Overall, there are a lot of pieces to shapeshift your build around the stats you're picking, around the skills you're picking. So it is much more complete on a looting front, I must say. Now add to that the custom class, and you can eventually unlock a secondary class. This is a moment where I thought, oh, okay, I kind of like this, because at first you're spending 15 levels focusing on one skill tree, and there's no other skill trees available. And I'm like, oh no, did they just outright do away with multiple skill trees just to streamline the whole thing? You don't get a third skill tree, so you only get a second one, but having those options and having 2 different action skills, or a total of 4, is actually, again, a really good development here. But I can't say I like the create a class option more than the presets, because again, I think what defined Borderlands, and now we know, I can understand why they experimented in this direction. What really defined Borderlands are these characters that have a lot of different ways to play them and interact with weapons differently, where you could have Zero with the sniper constantly going invisible and being a crit god, or you could take him in a completely different route if you wanted to make him more melee based. Like, there were multiple options to go with the same character. With this game, it's a lot of crisscrossing and stat building, so it's still there, but I do think the more finely crafted skill trees per 4 characters was better, because now you have 6 classes. Again, more crisscross options, more experimentation, but I do think that the finely crafted nature of these characters was much more preferred in my experience. Also, by going wide with this class system, Tiny Tina's Wonderlands feels like just another looter in the day and age of Destiny, or even Stranger of Paradise if you want to talk about a recent release where enemies vomit loot. It's just feeling like the franchise has been lapped at this point, as other games offer new ideas on top of the loot. Now, I mentioned hero points. You can actually add this when you level up to your strength, your intelligence, your dexterity, and each of these define different stats. I personally went with crit chance as my build, so I would be pretty much at 40% crit chance for every bullet landed. I would use high rate of fire weapons, and then after I hit that crit chance, I would scale up my strength, which increased my crit damage. I think this is the most obvious build to go, because some of the other stats didn't really do much, in my opinion, like increased status effect damage. And yeah, you could go ham with that if you wanted to, but to me, it just seemed obvious, like crit chance, go up to 40%, crit damage, unleash a high rate of fire weapon on someone, and shred everyone in sight. You can also customize your character's appearance, voice, and gender. For a lot of things this game gets wrong, I think it's very progressive in its representation, so I wanted to shout them out for that. Let's talk about co-op. Co-op in this game is really good because it reminds me a bit of, I would say, Fallout 76 or something like Elder Scrolls Online, where, if you don't know, 76 has one wasteland, Fallout or Elder Scrolls Online has one Tamriel, and the idea there is that someone could join in at any level and the game will scale to them. So I was fortunate enough to get a second review code. I had someone join me for a little bit of co-op, and when they joined, I was already 10 levels into the game. They were level 1, but they were able to join my session in progress. Everything scaled down to their level, so they were fighting level 1s, level 2s. I was fighting level 10s, level 11s. I love to see this because it doesn't limit the co-op play. It allows people to jump in immediately. Even with a brand new character, if you're on a second playthrough or something like that, you can just say, all right, I'm going to hop in there and let's start this new character up. And I don't have to go through what I thought was a pretty big slog of an opening, very linear, very narrow, very long-winded. You can get rid of all of that and just join someone's session in progress. And again, it doesn't limit the co-op play. So if someone falls behind, that's okay. They can still join into your session. You can go off and do other content, and then they can come back and you guys can still play together. You don't have to be the same exact level. So this was a great choice on the design front for co-op play. However, I still can't sit here and say that they took full advantage of what was offered to them in a brand new D&D fantasy world space. You'll have the same weapon types that you're likely very familiar with, ones that, for example, you'll throw at people and they'll blow up. It's as if they rethought the decorations and put them in the same house yet claimed it was at a different address. Like, you'll get a crossbow-style rifle, and it'll shoot just like a standard AR. Why not tap into this world more than just pure aesthetics? That's what this game does a lot of. It's almost a facelift in a number of ways. However, there is content here, and lots of it. While I finished the main story in about 20 hours, there was plenty more for me to go around and see. There's lots of side content, lots of areas, and they are jam-packed with quests. And a shout out to the 3D maps. When you open them up, you can really see where things are at, where it's easy to track down objectives if you get a little bit lost in a cave or something like that. But real kudos for the amount of side content that's here. Because again, you can blitz the main story and have no problem leveling up, but there is a lot to be seen in side content. Now, I haven't mentioned any of this yet. There is an overworld to Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. So as you're going from point A to point B, instead of just traveling across the Borderlands or getting in a vehicle and riding that, you're almost a figure on a board. And I like this because you'll see bottle caps that you can knock over. You'll see cheese doodles that you can smack out of the way if you complete certain quests. This is where it captures the imagination of a tabletop beautifully, this exploration-like mode. Unfortunately, some design decisions lead to it coming up short for me, like, for example, random encounters. So you'll be walking around, someone will approach you, hit you, and you're in a random encounter in this little arena and you're shooting people, and I'm like, this is taking a turn-based idea and putting it in an exploration-based first-person shooter. It doesn't work. They'll add more dungeons. So what'll happen is you'll go into a room, you'll have an encounter, you'll kill a bunch of enemies, the encounter bar will fill, a chest will appear, you'll go through a portal, repeat maybe 2 to 3 times. You'll be at the end of the dungeon. You'll get an item, a shrine piece, a quest objective, something like that. You'll continue on. So there are moments where the side content does feel expansive. There are moments where it's woefully shrunken down and just kind of feels like it doesn't fit in the case of random encounters. It's cute in design. It's cute in its idea, but I don't think it's well executed enough to earn its place as a mainstay in Borderlands. But these are ideas that I'd love to see them continue to toy with. I really do like this overworld idea because it's a different way of exploring. You get to see the character that you've customized. So there is something there worth looking into. I just don't think they nailed it in this first go. With that, those are just my thoughts on the gameplay. Let's move over to sound a little bit here. The soundtrack is inspired clear as day by Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep, which is a good thing. If you have ears and you have not listened to Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep, do yourself a favor, just kick back, maybe pop open the laptop, get some work done, listen to that soundtrack. It's so good, it's so peaceful. This game has a lot of that energy here, and I definitely appreciate it for it. Really good fantasy stuff here. Also, on the voice performance side of things, there's a solid personality behind a lot of the talent in this game, but the writing, again, just isn't that good, where unfortunately, even the best of actors, like, hey, maybe Will Arnett as the main antagonist, can't really fix the problems with this game. And then the environmental sounds, they're a nice touch that I didn't appreciate in older Borderlands games because it's constantly gunfire, where things like a seagull squawking overhead was a nice thing to notice here and there. So overall, sound design, pretty solid. Nothing really flat, nothing out of place. Works well for me. So now it's time to get into my verdict. Here's the thing. I may not have enjoyed Tiny Tina's Wonderlands for a number of reasons that are very subjective, right? I didn't think they captured the world well. I didn't think the writing was very good. And that makes it hard for me to recommend. But at the end of the day, I do have to be honest with myself and say that this isn't a bad video game. I just think it's geared towards a different audience. Not the typical Borderlands audience, at least. And that does make me very sad. I would love to sit here and be like, go out and get the new Borderlands. If you're a parent looking for a game for your kid, this is the play. It's perfect for that. It's got co-op. It's got the looter-shooter elements. There's not a ton of blood. Nothing's too raunchy or over the top here. It's a good introductory to this genre if you don't want them going into the online space like something such as Destiny. So there's my recommendation for that. Otherwise, if you're like me and a hardcore Borderland fan, I gotta say that this is a wait for a sale. It's a great palate cleanser for someone like me who's playing a lot of big open world titles. I've played Dying Light 2, I've played Elden Ring, I've played Stranger of Paradise. I know that's not open world, but I've been reviewing games left and right. So for this game to come out, it was kind of nice just to romp through some semi-open areas, shoot some enemies, shut off my brain a little bit. But that's the reality. Shut off my brain. I wasn't engaged on a narrative level, a gameplay level. It was very familiar. I can't sit here and openly recommend this game to everybody. To me, this is a wait for a sale at about $25 because it's not reinventing the Borderlands formula in a way I was expecting for a game that's changed its name, changed its setting, changed everything, character names, everything across the board. It's just a new set of decorations in many ways. There are some new systems here that I do think fans will enjoy, like the character creation, but go in with the expectation that this isn't the grand overhaul that will, in many people's eyes, save the franchise. So that's my overall verdict on Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. What do you think of what I've had to say about this game? Fire away in the comments down below. Looking forward to seeing your thoughts. Other than that, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. Those links are in the description down below. And a big thank you to all the patrons, all the members who continue to support the hell out of the content here. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.